Today I'm talking with Michael Sampson. He is a management consultant, and his work focuses on facilitating, impacting, and showing new approaches to work for teams and organizations. And he's worked with them all across the world. He's actually speaking to us from New Zealand. How are you doing today, Michael?
Hey Josh, I'm doing well. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I want to dive right in here and ask, how do you first discover the issue of user adoption? How do you first know that was what companies were struggling with?
So I've been in the consulting space for about 20 years or so, and in the early days, I was running a business partner company for one of the large vendors, and we were doing development of applications and installation of new ways for people to work. So new approaches to work, and really a focus back then on how to change work process, how to improve the way that stuff happened, and there seemed to be a real interest or a real need to help people adopt and use these tools, which, of course, is self-evident when you look back 20 years later. So I guess that was really the first time that it stuck out to me. During the 2000s, as a variety of new tools and technologies came onto the space, I saw this issue being repeated time and time again. And generally, the advice around adoption was, if you choose a good tool and make it available to everyone, then people will just use it because that's what people will do. And I fundamentally disagreed with that assertion. And interestingly, when I wrote the second book that I did in 2009, and then started presenting workshops around the world based on that book, there was a 20-minute talk in there on user adoption, and then there'd be about 10 minutes for Q&A. And there was a real hunger in that workshop for more on adoption. How do we deal with this? How do we approach this? This is what we've tried. This is what's working. This is what's not working. And at the end of that workshop tour, I came back to New Zealand and wrote a third book called User Adoption Strategies, Shifting Second Wave People to New Collaboration Tools. And the focus of that book was to elaborate really a theory and approach around user adoption that people could use. And it talked about a model, it talked about a series of strategies, it talked about case studies and illustrations and examples from organizations around the world. So I guess to summarize, going back to the late 90s when I was running a software development and consulting firm down here, and then into the 2000s, and into the latter part of the 2000s, just an overall long-term issue around adoption. It's not like, something magically fell out of the sky and you should do this. It was based on observations and discussions over many years.
So like you said, people seem to assume that once you put something in front of someone, they'll start using it. But you said that's not usually the case. Why do you think that is? Why do you think people struggle to adopt things even when you would naturally, logically think people will just go ahead and do it because they're supposed to?
Yeah, and I guess if we analyze the sentence that you just said, which is a sentence which would be repeated many times throughout the course of the day in many organizations around the world, we make assumptions that people will do things because they're supposed to, or we assume just because it's put in front of them that they should do that. In one of my other books, which is a roadmap to success with, in this case, collaboration tools, the adoption is actually the sixth focus in the overall roadmap to success. And in the earlier parts of roadmap to success, there are things like understand what the tools will do, get your vision right, realize the technology itself is a small factor in success, set up your governance approach, make every effort to work with business users, teams, and departments to understand the needs and opportunities and constraints that they operate in and under. And then the sixth one is around adoption. One of the things that I say in the workshop is that if you're looking at adoption and you have an issue with adoption, one of the reasons that I like the framework that I developed, and I developed it, so I'm allowed to like it, is that often an adoption problem can't be solved at the level of adoption. Perhaps you haven't understood the needs and requirements that people have, so you've got to go back to the fifth one, make every effort to engage the business. Or perhaps it's about the organizational constructs and constraints that you've put in place, the governance things, and you've got to go back to the fourth step around determine your governance approach. How do we make this work organizationally? How do we develop capabilities? What are the policies and procedures that we put in place. Or maybe if we go right back to the beginning, step one around really understand the tools and technologies, maybe we've chosen something that's just fundamentally misaligned with what people have to do every day. And whereas we assume that there are certain activities that we do and we've chosen that they do and we've chosen a tool to deal with that, in reality, that's not the case. And so if you have an adoption problem, there are strategies that you can use in the adoption phase, but very often the context that has been set in those earlier parts of the journey are critically important.
So when you're consulting with companies, do you find they're usually having problems in the actual adoption phase or in those earlier phases like you just mentioned?
Yeah, I guess many of the companies that I work with in terms of workshops and discussions around adoption have been through some sort of process and have now made tools available and are now struggling with adoption. And so whereas it's always fantastic to be able to start working with an organization at the very front end of the process and do it properly from the beginning, very often when I get called in to run a workshop or look at what's going on, do a health check, for example, it's because something's been tried and it's not working. So, for example, there's a research organization in your country that the IT team had made a decision themselves to bring in a certain new tool into the organization. So if you're looking at the roadmap approach, that would be around really understand the technology and choose a tool based on the needs and opportunities of the organization. So that decision was made sort of in isolation of the rest of the organization based on their analysis of the market, the vendors, the products. But they realized that there was going to be an adoption issue. They were clever enough to say, we've got to do something different in terms of engaging with our staff rather than just making this stuff available. And so when I went in for a workshop and series of discussions with them, they had already done a bunch of stuff around engaging with users, understanding needs, looking for fit between the tool that they had chosen in a vacuum and the needs of the organization. But then I also ran some discovery sessions with their staff members, their employees, to understand the need, understand the opportunity, look at how the various things could be brought together. So, you know, for that organization, there was a desire to do things more properly from the beginning than just have it blow up and have a failure. In the case of another organization in your country, headquartered in your country, but with a global footprint, and the work that I did with them, they again were introducing a new tool, but they were able to identify in advance of a problem that there was going to be an issue going on for them. And interestingly, as a result of the workshop that we ran in Seattle with that organization, they fundamentally pivoted the way that they approached user adoption. Historically, they'd taken a very classroom-based approach, and the pivot was to do one-to-one coaching with many more people based on the profile of the organization and what people did. They decided and they tested it that was a more effective way and actually cost-efficient way of helping people transition from old ways of working to new ways of working.
Very good. So going in now to the actual user adoption model you created, you have your four main stages of winning attention, cultivating basic concepts, enlivening applicability, and then making it real. So how did you develop these stages and how does that process look like for a company?
That's a great question. So at the end of 2009, I had an invitation to go to a conference in Europe in the end of February, I think it was, February, early March. And I'd already done a couple of books around user adoption. And so I set myself the target over the Christmas holiday season down here, summer here in New Zealand. We're in the middle of winter for you guys. So the task for me over that summer Christmas holidays was to try and get a book done before the conference at the end of February. So I dived into research mode. I put a survey together. I got 400 responses from around the world from people that were involved in adoption in their organizations. And and analyzing the strategies that people were talking about for user adoption beyond just throw it out there and everything will be great. And looking at the survey results, there were some common themes that came through, and in trying to put a framework and a structure around those key ideas from the research, from the surveys, from the discussions, from the case studies, this four-stage model sort of came out of that work. So stage one, as you said, is winning attention. How do we show the reality of this for people inside the organization? I argue that you can't just say you have to do it because it's the proper thing to do. I think that's very lazy thinking and very lazy practice. I advocate that there are some specific things that you need to put in place in order to make that work. So in stage one, it might be that your executives are using the tool in their day-to-day practices and are getting value and benefit from it. And that sets a real tenor inside the organization when executives are actively using it and talking about it as well. You could have strategies like a roadshow, going around and turning up in person to particular offices and giving a presentation about new possibilities, new approaches to work, and seeing what resonates with particular people, and then using those people as pivots and as levers inside the organization to do some other things. One of the other strategies in stage one is called organizational chaos, which isn't something that people should go out and try to orchestrate, but is something that people can often take advantage of if there are chaotic things going on in the environment. So a merger or acquisition, for example, where there's so much uncertainty, is often an organizational chaos issue that can result in people having a greater appetite for changing the way that they work, or a need to change the way they work. I live in Christchurch, New Zealand, and there was an earthquake some years ago, and one of the insurance firms down here, in advance of the earthquake, had been talking forever about creating a unified claims process, and I think they had 6 different systems leading up to the earthquake. But when the earthquake hit, and suddenly they got this flood of tens upon tens of thousands of claims, there was a meeting, there was a discussion, and within 6 weeks of the earthquake, they had a unified claims process finally in place for everyone to use, because they leveraged the organizational chaos because they really had no other choice. Stage 2 was then about cultivating basic concepts. If you have captured someone's attention using the strategies that I've mentioned or the others that are in the book, then it's important to give the ability for staff members to develop competence, the ability to actually use the tool. So strategies in stage 2 are like classroom-based training, web-based training, written materials that are available on the intranet. I would say now one-to-one coaching could go in there as well for particular people, although that's not in the book as a stage 2 strategy. Stage 3 of the model then is called enlivening applicability. And that's about saying, in stage 1, we showed you why this is important. In stage 2, we demonstrated how to make use of it, and you have tools to make use of it. Now let's look specifically in terms of your group, your team, your department, your individual work. Where does this make sense? Where and when does this make sense in the work that you're doing? And so there are strategies in there like Sandbox, providing a capability for people to go and try particular things out and see how it could be fitted to the work that they do. There's a strategy in here called facilitated group reimagining, which involves bringing in an outside person to facilitate a discussion around, so how do you guys work today? What's working well for you? What's not working well for you? And how do we introduce change and innovation into what's going on? And there are some other strategies in there as well. And then stage 4 is around making it real. So making it a standard, practical part of doing business day to day. So, for example, if people have been using Excel spreadsheets for tracking leads around new market opportunities, and a CRM system is introduced, then in stage 4 we'd be saying things like, you can't use Excel for that anymore, and we're going to help you migrate the data in stage 3. So there's a bulk loading party, so let's get the data out of there, and then we're going to use Salesforce or whatever CRM tool that you're going to use. And any reporting that you do has to be done out of Salesforce. We don't accept any reporting out of any other places. There are examples of organizations where a manager has said, I'm going to learn the new reporting system, and all right, people in my team, I'm not going to accept any reports from you around what you're doing, what's been going on, pipeline, lead gen, all of that sort of stuff, in any place apart from the CRM system. Or in another organization, when a CRM system was introduced previously, when there were executive briefings around new market opportunities and pipeline, staff members would have, salespeople would have to develop a presentation, turn up, and give that to the executives. And so the decision was made, and it's really a stage 4 strategy, around anytime you present to the executives, just present directly from Salesforce. Show us what's going on. Don't put something in between Salesforce and us by creating a slide deck. Just show us what's going on. And so that very practice of requiring it to be done from there, and it becomes part of our expectation, is a stage 4 strategy around making it real. And there are some various others in there, like internal user groups. So if you've got a big Salesforce, for example, and people are experimenting and learning and doing good things in Salesforce or another CRM system, then having an opportunity, having a structured approach for an internal user group where people can trade ideas. This is what's working for me, or groan about things that aren't working. You know, the way that email integration between Salesforce and Outlook isn't working great for me, and someone might say, well, you know, I've come across this great tool that enables that to work a whole lot easier for us. And, oh, what is that? And so, you know, that kind of sharing within an organization can help spread the goodness of new ways, make it a socially expected way of working, and so on.
All right, thanks for that. So, what are some then of the biggest frustrations or maybe mistakes that you've experienced or seen working with different companies trying to adopt different pieces of software?
Well, I guess the main one that, yeah, I guess there's two that would come immediately to mind. The first one would be the standard default strategy of create new tools and make them available with an assumption that then people will use it. And in the survey that I did for the second edition of the book, this actually was quite highly ranked as a strategy in terms of being used. Quite a few people were making use of this strategy. But then in the question that says, how would you rate the effectiveness of this? Very few people said that it was highly effective, and very many people said that it was very ineffective. And the second thing that would come immediately to mind is that very often the stage 2 strategies, classroom training, web-based training, pages on the internet, which we sort of know how to do, and we have a historical practice around doing those. Some organizations fixate on those things as being the only things that are required in an adoption framework or an overall adoption approach, whereas those are merely stage 2 strategies. And if you haven't demonstrated why something is important, if you haven't won the attention, if you haven't then, after doing those strategies, gone through to the other levels to help a group or a team understand where the tools can be used and to make it real within their work and to make it a standard part of day-to-day work, then you've spent your budget in stage 2, but you've ignored the bigger issue and the context surrounding the use of those strategies.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, over your years in this space, have you seen this issue been improving over time, or is it still just as big as it was when you first wrote the book, or are more companies figuring this out, you think?
Well, I think there's definitely a lot more discussion around the whole adoption topic, and that's gratifying to see as someone that's been in the space for a long time. I think it's a cool area that you have to figure out an adoption approach, and there's a proliferation of articles and advice around, 8 things to do to get adoption, or 10 things to do to get adoption, or 5 things to do. One of the kindest things that anyone ever said to me around the adoption topic was, Michael, you wrote the book before adoption was cool. And So, yeah, I've been in the space a long time. I think that there are some positive trends and changes. I think some of the easy how-to articles don't really help the issue so much. I think there's a greater vocabulary in the market around adoption. I still think it's a critical issue. And I mean, I think one of the reasons that it's a critical issue is that we see a new generation of system implementers coming into organizations who find these new things. Oh, analytics, let's do this, or CRM, let's do this. And they don't have the history and the background around how to make adoption work for those new tools and approaches. And so that the new generation of people bringing systems in have to learn the lessons that have been well established or tried in other places.
Okay, great. So if people want to find then either more resources about adoption or learn more from you, where should they go? What would you recommend?
Well, the internet is a treasure trove of information, and it's very easy to get drowned in there. So if you Google user adoption strategies, you'll find a plethora of materials there. There is a fairly active channel on Twitter, hashtag user adoption, that people are writing to. And actually, when I checked into it yesterday, there was quite a bit of stuff around CRM adoption as well. So I think it's an issue that there's definitely lots of material available on it. Some of the synthesized materials that I have are available in presentation form or video form or book form. So on my website, you can get access to the book User Adoption Strategies. There's a video presentation from September last year of me talking about user adoption and the high-level overview of that model and some of the survey data. There's also various of my presentations that you can get to from my website or look on SlideShare and so on. But yeah, so that's michaelsampson.net. Michael Sampson, michaelsampson.net is the place to go for my stuff.
Thank you very much. I'll make sure that I'll have the link above the interview for everyone to click through if they want to. So that's all my questions.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
For right now. But do you have anything else you would like to add or any questions for me before we wrap up?
I think I've talked through the key points. I think your questions have enabled me to elaborate the high level points. So thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for the work that you guys are doing to simplify tools for people and make it easier to use tools, which is an important attribute of an adoption program.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for taking the time to sit down and talk with me.
You're welcome, Josh. Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.